I found the job listing at almost 2 in the morning. At that point, I had already spent 3 straight hours scrolling through endless garbage offers that either paid horribly or looked fake enough to get me kidnapped. I was exhausted, frustrated, and honestly close to giving up for the night when I noticed one final listing buried near the bottom of the page. Live-in caretaker needed for elderly man, 1 week only. Excellent pay. That last part immediately caught my attention. The amount they were offering for only 7 days of work was ridiculous. Suspiciously ridiculous. I clicked on the listing expecting it to be another scam. But instead, the post was strangely simple. No company name, no photo, just a phone number and a short description explaining that an elderly man living outside the city needed temporary in-home assistance while his daughter handled urgent business matters. I stared at the screen for a while. Something about the post felt odd. Not dangerous exactly, just strangely empty. Like whoever wrote it intentionally avoided saying too much. Still, I needed money badly enough not to care. So I called. A woman answered almost immediately. Her voice sounded calm. Too calm, not rude, not friendly either, just flat. I explained that I was calling about the caretaker position, and after a few seconds of silence, she simply said, "Come tomorrow afternoon. We'll explain everything in person." Then she gave me the address. No interview, no questions about experience, nothing. That should have been my first warning. But when you're desperate enough, your brain becomes very good at ignoring warning signs. The next afternoon, I drove nearly 2 hours outside the city before finally reaching the property. The farther I went, the emptier the roads became. Eventually, the highway turned into narrow forest roads surrounded by enormous trees that blocked most of the sunlight overhead. By the time I reached the address, the sky had already started turning gray. And then I saw the house. It looked completely normal, large, clean, quiet. A beautiful countryside home sitting alone near the woods. Nothing about it looked threatening. If anything, it almost seemed comforting. A woman opened the front door before I even reached it. She looked around 40 years old, dressed neatly, with dark hair tied behind her head. She smiled politely the moment she saw me. But something about the smile felt forced, like she had practiced it. "You must be Claire," she said. I nodded. "I'm Evelyn." She shook my hand gently before inviting me inside. The interior of the house looked warm and elegant. Old wooden furniture, soft lighting, shelves filled with books and photographs. The air smelled faintly like tea and dust. For the first few minutes, everything honestly felt fine. Normal. But during our conversation, I started noticing small things about Evelyn that bothered me. Tiny things. Moments where her behavior suddenly changed for no reason. Sometimes she would stop speaking in the middle of a sentence and stare at the wall for several seconds before continuing like nothing happened. Sometimes her smile disappeared instantly whenever I mentioned certain topics. And twice during our conversation, I noticed her quietly locking doors behind us without saying anything. I told myself she was just stressed. Taking care of an elderly parent couldn't be easy. Still, something about her made me uneasy. Eventually, Evelyn led me into the living room, and that's where I first saw him. The old man sat silently near the window inside a large wheelchair. At first glance, he looked extremely frail, thin gray hair, pale skin, long fingers resting motionlessly on the arms of the chair. He wore a dark sweater despite the warmth inside the house, and he didn't move at all, not even when we entered the room. "That's my father," Evelyn said quietly. The old man slowly turned his head toward me and looked directly into my eyes. I've never been able to explain that stare properly. It wasn't angry, it wasn't confused, it wasn't even emotional. That's what made it so uncomfortable. His expression remained completely calm while he stared at me without blinking. Not normal eye contact, not curiosity, just watching. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then Evelyn smiled awkwardly. "Don't worry about that," she said. "He does it sometimes." I forced a small laugh. "Does he speak much?" Not anymore. She explained that her father rarely talked these days and spent most of his time sitting quietly in the wheelchair. According to her, he could barely walk anymore and usually needed help moving around the house. "He's harmless," she added softly. The old man continued staring at me the entire time she spoke. Evelyn then started explaining my responsibilities, preparing meals, helping him move if necessary, making sure he took medication, and most importantly, never leaving him alone. "He becomes anxious if nobody is nearby," she explained. I nodded while trying not to look back at him again, but I could still feel his eyes on me constantly. Then Evelyn suddenly leaned slightly closer to me and lowered her voice. "If he leaves his wheelchair at night," she said quietly, "guide him back immediately." Something about the way she said it made cold chills crawl across my skin. "What do you mean if he leaves it?" For the first time during our conversation, Evelyn hesitated, just for a second. Then she smiled again. "He gets confused sometimes." I looked back toward the old man. He was still staring directly at me, completely motionless, completely silent, and for some reason, I suddenly had the horrible feeling that he understood every word we were saying. The first 2 days passed much easier than I expected. Honestly, if somebody had asked me during that time whether I thought something was wrong in that house, I probably would have said no, at least not yet. The atmosphere still felt strange sometimes, but strange in a quiet, uncomfortable way, not a dangerous one. Most of the day was incredibly routine. I helped the old man move between rooms when he needed to, prepared food, cleaned parts of the house, and occasionally sat in the living room while he silently stared through the windows toward the forest outside. His daughter, Evelyn, left early every morning and usually returned late in the evening, and every single time she came back home, the first thing she asked me was always the same. Did he leave the wheelchair? Not, how was he? Not, did he eat? Always that one question. The old man himself almost never spoke. Sometimes entire hours passed without hearing a single sound from him. But what unsettled me the most wasn't the silence. It was the staring. No matter where I moved inside the house, eventually I would look up and realize he was watching me again. Calmly, without blinking, sometimes from across the room, sometimes from dark hallways. Once, while washing dishes in the kitchen, I turned around and nearly screamed because he was sitting silently in the doorway behind me, just watching. "Sorry," I laughed nervously. "You scared me." He didn't react, didn't smile, didn't answer. He just kept staring with those pale, exhausted eyes while his fingers slowly tapped against the armrest of the wheelchair. Tap, tap, tap. That second night, I barely slept. Not because something happened, because something felt wrong. The house became unnaturally quiet after midnight. Not normal nighttime quiet either. The kind of silence where even small sounds suddenly feel amplified. The ticking clock downstairs, floorboards settling, wind brushing lightly against the windows. At some point around 3 in the morning, I remember opening my eyes suddenly with the horrible feeling that someone was standing near my bedroom door. But when I looked, nothing was there. The third day started normally again, almost comfortably normal. I made breakfast, cleaned part of the downstairs bathroom, and spent most of the afternoon reading while the old man sat near the living room window staring outside like always. At one point, I even started feeling embarrassed about how paranoid I'd become. Maybe the isolation was simply getting into my head. Maybe Evelyn was just eccentric. Maybe the old man's behavior only felt disturbing because silence makes people uncomfortable. That explanation felt reasonable enough until that night. I woke up sometime after midnight because of a loud crash downstairs. Glass shattering. For a second, I just lay there confused, trying to understand whether I'd imagined it. Then another sound echoed from downstairs, a slow metallic scraping noise. Every instinct in my body told me not to leave the room, but I forced myself out of bed anyway. The hallway outside my bedroom was dark except for faint yellow light coming from the kitchen downstairs. I walked carefully toward the staircase while listening. No voices, no movement, just silence again. When I finally reached the kitchen doorway, I froze. A glass jar lay shattered across the floor, and beside it sat the old man in his wheelchair. He faced the wall completely motionless, not moving, not reacting, just sitting there in the darkness. The kitchen light above him flickered softly every few seconds, making the entire scene feel unreal somehow. "Sir?" My voice sounded weak. The old man didn't answer. I slowly stepped closer. "Are you okay?" Still nothing. The closer I got, the more uncomfortable I felt. Because I suddenly realized something disturbing. I hadn't heard the wheelchair move. Not once. No wheels, no footsteps, nothing. And yet somehow he had gotten from the living room to the kitchen completely silently. My heart started beating faster. I carefully moved around to face him directly. His eyes slowly shifted toward me, and I nearly stepped backward. He was smiling. Not a warm smile. Not even a human-looking smile. Just a thin, stretched expression that looked wrong on his face somehow, like somebody pretending to understand what smiling looked like. Then very quietly, almost too quietly to hear, he whispered, "You woke up." It was the first time I had heard his voice. Dry, weak, but completely clear. Before I could respond, the smile disappeared instantly. His expression returned to that same calm emptiness from before, like the moment had never happened. I helped clean the broken glass while trying desperately to steady my breathing. The old man stayed silent the entire time, staring toward the kitchen wall again while his fingers tapped slowly against the wheelchair armrest. Tap, tap, tap. When everything was cleaned, I carefully guided him back toward the living room. And that's when I noticed the wheelchair wheels. They were wet, not slightly wet, covered in mud. Dark, wet mud, like he had been outside. I stared at them for several seconds, then slowly looked toward the front door. Still locked. I didn't sleep at all after that. I stayed inside my room with the lamp on, listening to every tiny sound the house made until morning finally arrived. And somehow, the fourth day felt even worse. Because now the house no longer felt strange. It felt aware of me. By the beginning of the fourth day, I had already decided I wasn't staying the entire week. I didn't care how much they were paying me anymore. Something inside that house felt deeply wrong, and every hour I spent there made the feeling worse. Still, I kept trying to explain everything logically. The old man wandering at night could have been dementia. The staring could have been some neurological issue. Even the mud on the wheelchair wheels probably had a reasonable explanation if I thought about it long enough. But what truly terrified me was the growing feeling that both Evelyn and her father were hiding something from me. And slowly, the house itself started changing too. That morning, Evelyn returned home earlier than usual. The moment she stepped inside, her eyes immediately moved toward her father, sitting silently near the fireplace. Then she looked at me. "Did he leave the wheelchair again?" The way she asked it made my stomach tighten. I hesitated for half a second before answering. "He was in the kitchen last night." Evelyn froze completely still. For just a moment, all emotion disappeared from her face. Then she smiled again. That same fake practice smile. "Did he say anything?" The question caught me off guard. Just, "You woke up." Evelyn looked down toward the floor quietly, almost like she was thinking or remembering something. Then very softly she whispered, "That's more than usual." I waited for her to explain further. She didn't. Instead, she walked toward her father, leaned down beside him, and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. The old man slowly turned his head toward her. And for the first time since I arrived there, I saw actual emotion on his face. Fear. Just for 1 second. Then it disappeared again. Later that afternoon, I tried calling my sister while Evelyn was upstairs. Still no signal, not even one bar. At that point, it had been days without proper phone reception, which honestly didn't make sense anymore. Even isolated areas usually had something. I walked through almost every room in the house trying to find a signal. Nothing. Then, while standing near the upstairs hallway window, I noticed something outside. Footprints. Fresh, muddy footprints circling the house. Dozens of them. Maybe more. At first, I thought they belonged to Evelyn, but then I realized something horrifying. They were too irregular. Some prints looked human, others didn't, and several sets led directly toward the forest before abruptly disappearing between the trees. A cold feeling spread through my chest. I slowly looked back into the hallway behind me, and for one horrible second, I genuinely thought I saw the old man standing at the far end of the corridor. Not sitting, standing. I blinked. He was gone. That evening dinner felt unbearable. The old man sat across from me silently while Evelyn spoke about random, meaningless things in an almost forced, cheerful voice. She kept asking whether I liked the house, whether I was sleeping well, whether I planned to continue caretaking work after this job. But every few minutes I caught her secretly watching her father, like she was monitoring him, waiting for something. At one point, she suddenly stopped talking mid-sentence, completely froze, and stared toward the dark hallway behind me. Her expression changed instantly. "Dad," she was whispered quietly. I turned around immediately. Nothing was there. When I looked back at Evelyn, she was smiling again, but her hands were shaking slightly. That night, I locked my bedroom door, not because I truly believed something supernatural was happening. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But deep down, I think I already knew fear had completely taken over me. I woke sometime around 2 in the morning. At first, I didn't understand why. Then I noticed the door slightly open. I was absolutely certain I locked it before sleeping. The hallway outside was dark, but through the narrow opening, I could see part of the corridor illuminated by faint moonlight from the upstairs windows. And standing there was a silhouette. Somebody was outside my room, watching me. I stopped breathing completely. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then the silhouette slowly leaned backward out of view, not walking away, just slowly disappearing from the doorway. I grabbed my phone immediately to turn on the flashlight. Dead. Completely dead. Even though I had charged it earlier, the air inside the room suddenly felt freezing cold. And then I heard it, very softly from somewhere downstairs. Tap, tap, tap. The exact same sound the old man's fingers made against the wheelchair. Only now it sounded faster, more excited somehow. I stayed frozen in bed listening while the tapping slowly moved through the house below me, across the living room, into the kitchen. Then silence. A few seconds later, something heavy slammed violently against the wall downstairs. I nearly screamed. Then came another crash, and another. I forced myself out of bed and slowly approached the bedroom door. Every instinct in my body begged me not to open it. But eventually I did. The hallway was empty, dark, silent. Then I noticed something near my feet, a muddy footprint, right outside my bedroom door. My pulse started hammering violently, because it wasn't a shoe print. It looked almost human, but the toes were too long, too thin. Another loud crash echoed downstairs, this time followed by something even worse. Laughter. Not loud laughter, not normal laughter, weak, dry, old. The old man was laughing downstairs in the darkness, and for the first time since arriving at that house, I became completely certain of one thing. Whatever was happening there was not an illness. The laughter downstairs continued for almost a full minute, weak, dry, broken, but unmistakably real. I stood frozen in the upstairs hallway, gripping my dead phone so tightly my hand hurt, while somewhere below me the old man laughed alone in the darkness. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence afterward felt even worse, because now my brain had space to think. And the more I thought about everything that had happened in that house, the more terrifying it became. The footprints outside, the staring, Evelyn constantly asking whether he had left the wheelchair, the locked doors, the tapping sounds moving through the house at night. None of it felt random anymore. It felt connected, like I had slowly walked into something that had already been happening long before I arrived there. I barely slept after that. Every tiny sound made my body tense. Every creak of the house made me look toward the bedroom door, expecting to see somebody standing there again. When morning finally came, I had already decided one thing. I was leaving that day. I didn't care if Evelyn got angry. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted out of that house. But the next morning felt wrong immediately. The air inside the house seemed colder than usual, and the silence felt heavier somehow. Even the light outside looked dim despite the clear weather. I walked downstairs carefully, expecting to see Evelyn in the kitchen. Instead, I found the old man alone in the living room, sitting silently in his wheelchair near the fireplace, watching me. "You're awake?" Evelyn's voice suddenly said behind me. I nearly jumped. She stood in the hallway holding a cup of coffee, smiling softly, but she looked exhausted. Her eyes had dark circles beneath them now, and her hands trembled slightly while holding the mug. "I need to leave today," I told her immediately. The smile disappeared from her face. For several seconds, she didn't say anything. Then quietly she asked, "Did he scare you?" I didn't even know how to answer that question anymore. Before I could speak, the old man suddenly tapped his fingers hard against the wheelchair armrest. Tap, 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 much louder than before. Evelyn instantly looked toward him, and I swear to God, I saw fear in her eyes again. Real fear. The rest of the day passed painfully slowly. Evelyn barely spoke anymore. She mostly stayed upstairs while I remained downstairs with the old man, counting the hours until evening because I planned to leave the second this second and my phone had enough charge again. But sometime around sunset, my phone suddenly died completely. Not low battery, dead, black screen. It wouldn't turn back on no matter what I tried. Then, only a few minutes later, the power in the house went out. Every light shut off instantly. The television, the lamps, everything. The entire house dropped into darkness. For 1 second, I just sat there staring at the black room while my heartbeat pounded violently inside my chest. Then, somewhere in the kitchen, something crashed onto the floor, glass shattering. Again, a horrible cold feeling spread through my entire body. "No," I whispered to myself. I grabbed my jacket immediately and rushed toward the front door. If the power was out, maybe the electronic lock system had failed. Maybe now I could finally leave. I grabbed the handle, twisted hard. Nothing. I tried again, harder. Still locked. Panic exploded inside me. I moved to the second lock, then the third. None of them moved. It felt like the entire door had been welded shut from the outside. And behind me, something scraped slowly across the kitchen floor. I turned around carefully. The kitchen was illuminated only by faint moonlight coming through the windows now. And sitting there with his back facing me was the old man in his wheelchair, completely still. For several long seconds I couldn't move. Then finally I forced myself to speak. "Sir?" No response. Another strange feeling crawled through my chest because something about him looked wrong. The wheelchair seemed empty somehow, too light, too still. I slowly walked toward him. Every step felt heavier than the last. My breathing became shaky. The entire house was silent except for the soft sound of the wheelchair creaking slightly. "Sir?" Still nothing. I reached out carefully and placed my hand on his shoulder. The moment I touched him, something slammed into me with horrifying force. It felt like being hit by a speeding car. An invisible impact exploded through my body and threw me violently backward across the kitchen floor. I crashed hard against the cabinets, pain shooting through my spine so intensely I couldn't breathe. For several seconds, my entire body refused to move. I lay there gasping in shock, unable to stand, unable to scream, and slowly the wheelchair began turning toward me by itself. Creak! My blood turned cold. The old man was still sitting there, but now his head hung unnaturally low, almost limp. Then he stood up, slowly, quietly, effortlessly. There was nothing weak or fragile about him anymore. His body straightened fully while the wheelchair rolled backwards slightly behind him, And when he finally lifted his head toward me, I felt something inside my mind break. His eyes were completely white, not cloudy, not blind, pure white, like there was nothing human left inside them anymore. He slowly walked toward me while I desperately tried forcing my body to move, but I couldn't. It felt like something heavy was crushing me into the floor itself. The old man stopped directly beside me, then slowly bent down close enough for me to smell the rotten sweetness on his breath, and smiling that same horrible stretched smile from the kitchen night, he whispered,
The last caretaker wasn't as delicious as you.